Saint George, according to legend, was a soldier in the Roman army who later became venerated as a Christian martyr. His parents were Christians of Greek background. His father Gerontius was a Roman army official from Cappadocia, and his mother Polychronia was a Christian from Lydda in the Roman province of Syria Palestina. Accounts differ regarding whether George was born in Cappadocia or Syria Palestina, but agree that he was raised at least partly in Lydda. Saint George became an officer in the Roman army in the guard of Diocletian, who ordered his death for failing to recant his Christian faith. In hagiography, Saint George is one of the most venerated saints in the Catholic Church, Anglican, East Syrian, and Miaphysite churches. He is one of the 14 Holy Helpers and is regarded as one of the most prominent military saints. Immortalized in the myth of St. George and the dragon killing in Beirut, Lebanon. His memorial, St. George's Day, is traditionally celebrated on the Julian date of the 23rd of April. Many countries, cities, professions and organizations claim St. George as their patron. The life of St. George. Historians have argued the exact details of the birth of St. George for over a century, although the approximate date of his death is subject to little debate. The 1913 Catholic Encyclopedia takes the position that there seems to be no ground for doubting the historical existence of St. George, but that little faith can be placed in some of the fanciful stories about him. The work of the Bollandists Daniel Paperbrock, John Bolland, and Godfrey Henschen in the 17th century was one of the first pieces of scholarly research to establish the historicity of the saint's existence via their publications in Bibliotheca Hagiographica Graeca, and paved the way for other scholars to dismiss the medieval legends. Pope Gelasius stated that George was among those saints whose names are justly reverenced among men, but whose actions are known only to God. The traditional legends have offered a historicized narration of George's encounter with the dragon. The modern legend that follows below is synthesized from early and late hagiographical sources, omitting the more fantastical episodes. Chief among the legendary sources about the saint is the Golden Legend, which remains the most familiar version in English owing to William Caxton's 15th-century translation. Saint George likely was born to a Greek Christian noble family in Lydda, Syria Palestina, during the late 3rd century between about 275 AD and 285 AD. He died in the Greek city of Nicomedia in Asia Minor. His father, Gerontios, was a Greek from Cappadocia, an officer in the Roman army. His mother, Polychronia, was a Greek native of Lydda. They were both Christians from noble families of the Anici, so their child was raised with Christian beliefs. They decided to call him Georgios, meaning worker of the land. At the age of 14, George lost his father. A few years later, George's mother, Polychronia, died. Eastern accounts give the names of his parents as Anastasius and Theobast. George then decided to go to Nicomedia and present himself to Emperor Diocletian to apply for a career as a soldier. Diocletian welcomed him with open arms, as he had known his father, Gerontius, one of his finest soldiers. By his late 20s, George was promoted to the rank of tribunus and stationed as an imperial guard of the emperor at Nicomedia. On the 24th of February AD 303, Diocletian issued an edict that every Christian soldier in the army should be arrested and every other soldier should offer a sacrifice to the Roman gods of the time. However, George objected, and with the courage of his faith, approached the emperor and ruler. Diocletian was upset, not wanting to lose his best tribune and the son of his best official, Gerontius. But George loudly renounced the emperor's edict, and in front of his fellow soldiers and tribunes he claimed himself to be a Christian and declared his worship of Jesus Christ. Diocletian attempted to convert George, even offering gifts of land, money, and slaves if he made a sacrifice to the Roman gods. He made many offers, but George never accepted. Recognizing the futility of his efforts and insisting on upholding his edict, Diocletian ordered that George be executed for his refusal. Before the execution, George gave his wealth to the poor and prepared himself. After various torture sessions, including laceration on a wheel of swords during which he was resuscitated 3 times, George was executed by decapitation before Nicomedia's city wall, on the 23rd of April 303. A witness of his suffering convinced Empress Alexandra and Athanasius, a pagan priest, to become Christians, as well. So they joined George in martyrdom. His body was returned to Lydda for burial, where Christians soon came to honor him as a martyr. Edward Gibbon argued that George, or at least the legend from which the above is distilled, is based on George of Cappadocia, a notorious Arian bishop who was Athanasius of Alexandria's most bitter rival, and that it was he who in time became St. George of England. According to Professor Berry, Gibbon's latest editor, this theory of Gibbon's has nothing to be said for it. He adds that the connection of St. George with a dragon-slaying legend does not relegate him to the region of the myth. In 1856, Ralph Waldo Emerson published a book of essays entitled English Traits. In it, he wrote a paragraph on the history of St. George. Emerson compared the legend of St. George to the legend of Amerigo Vespucci, calling the former an impostor, and the latter a thief. The editorial notes appended to the 1904 edition of Emerson's complete work state that Emerson based his account on the work of Gibbon, and that current evidence seems to show that the real St. George was not George the Arian of Cappadocia. Merton M. Sealtz also quotes Edward Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson's youngest son, as stating that he believed his father's account was derived from Gibbon and that the real St. George was apparently another who died 2 generations earlier, St. George and the Dragon. Eastern Orthodox depictions of St. George slaying a dragon in Beirut often include the image of a young woman who looks on from a distance. The standard iconographic interpretation of the image icon is that the dragon represents both Satan and the monster from his life story. The young woman is the wife of Diocletian, Alexandra. Thus, the image, as interpreted through the language of Byzantine iconography, is an image of the martyrdom of the saint. The episode of St. George and the Dragon was a legend brought back with the Crusaders and retold with the courtly appurtenances belonging to the genre of romance. The earliest known depiction of the legend is from early 11th century Cappadocia. The earliest known surviving narrative text is an 11th century Georgian text. In the fully developed Western version, which developed as part of the Golden Legend, a dragon or crocodile makes its nest at the spring that provides water for the city of Selene. Consequently, the citizens have to dislodge the dragon from its nest for a time, to collect water. To do so, each day they offer the dragon at first to sheep, and if no sheep can be found, then a maiden is the best substitute for one. The victim is chosen by drawing lots. One day, this happens to be the princess. The monarch begs for her life to be spared, but to no avail. She is offered to the dragon, but then St. George appears on his travels. He faces the dragon, protects himself with the sign of the cross, slays the dragon, and rescues the princess. The citizens abandon their ancestral paganism and convert to Christianity. The dragon motif was first combined with the standardized Passio Georgian Vincent of Beauvais encyclopedic speculum historiale and then in Jacobus de Voragine's Golden Legend, which guaranteed its popularity in the later Middle Ages as a literary and pictorial subject. The parallels with Perseus, Cetus, and Andromeda are inescapable. In the allegorical reading, the dragon embodies a suppressed pagan cult. The story has other roots that predate Christianity. Examples such as Sabazios, the Sky Father, who was usually depicted riding on horseback, and Zeus's defeat of Typhon the Titan in Greek mythology, along with examples from Germanic and Vedic traditions, have led a number of historians, such as Loomis, to suggest that George is a Christianized version of older deities in Indo-European culture, or at least a suitably Christian substitute for one of them. In the medieval romances, the lance with which St. George slew the dragon was called Ascalon after the Levantine city of Ashkelon, today in Israel. The name Ascalon was used by Winston Churchill for his personal aircraft during World War II, according to records at Bletchley Park. Some evidence links the legend back to very old Egyptian and Phoenician sources in a late antique statue of Horus fighting a dragon. This ties the legendary George to some extent, the historical George, to various ancient sources using mythological and linguistic arguments. In Egyptian mythology, the god Setek murdered his brother Osiris. Horus, the son of Osiris, avenged his father's death by killing Setek. This iconography of the horseman with spear overcoming evil was widespread throughout the Christian period. Veneration as a martyr. A church built in Lydda during the reign of Constantine I was consecrated to a man of the highest distinction. According to the church history of Eusebius of his area, the name of the patron was not disclosed, but later he was asserted to have been George. By the time of the Muslim conquest of the mostly Christian and Zoroastrian Middle East and in the 7th century, a basilica dedicated to the saint in Lydda existed. The church was destroyed by Muslims in 1010, but was later rebuilt and dedicated to St. George by the Crusaders. A new church was erected in 1872 and is still standing. During the 4th century, the veneration of George spread from Palestine through Lebanon to the rest of the Eastern Roman Empire, though the martyr is not mentioned in the Syriac Breviarium, and Georgia. In Georgia, the feast day on November 23 is credited to Saint Nino of Cappadocia, who in Georgian hagiography is a relative of Saint George, credited with bringing Christianity to the Georgians in the 4th century. By the 5th century, the veneration of St. George had reached the Christian Western Roman Empire, as well. In 494, George was canonized as a saint by Pope Gelasius I, among those whose names are justly reverenced among men, but whose acts are known only to God. In England, he was mentioned among the martyrs by Bede. The earliest dedication to the saint is a church at Fordington, Dorset, that is mentioned in the will of Alfred the Great. He did not rise to the position of patron saint, however, until the 14th century, and he was still obscured by Edward the Confessor, the traditional patron saint of England, until 1552 when All Saints banners other than George's were abolished in the English Reformation. An apparition of George heartened the Franks at the Siege of Antioch, 1098, and made a similar appearance the following year at Jerusalem. Chivalric military orders of St. George were established in Aragon, Genoa, Hungary, and by Frederick III, Holy Roman Emperor, and in England the Synod of Oxford, 1222 declared St. George's Day a feast day in the Kingdom of England. Edward III put his Order of the Garter under the banner of St. George probably in 1348. The chronicler Froissart observed the English invoking St. George as a battle cry on several occasions during the 100 Years' War. In his rise as a national saint, George was aided by the very fact that the saint had no legendary connection with England, and no specifically localized shrine, as that of Thomas Becket at Canterbury. Consequently, numerous shrines were established during the late 15th century. Muriel C. McClendon has written, and his did not become closely identified with a particular occupation or with the cure of a specific malady. The establishment of George as a popular saint and protective giant in the West that had captured the medieval imagination was codified by the official elevation of his feast to a festum duplex at a church council in 1415. On the date that had become associated with his martyrdom, the 23rd of April, wide latitude existed from community to community in celebration of the day across late medieval and early modern England, and no uniform, national, celebration elsewhere, a token of the popular and vernacular nature of George's cult use and its local horizons. supported by a local guild or confraternity under George's protection, or the dedication of a local church. When the Reformation in England severely curtailed the saints' days in the calendar, St. George's Day was among the holidays that continued to be observed. In Islamic cultures, St. George is something of an exception among saints and legends, in that he is known and revered by Muslims, while being venerated by Christians throughout the Middle East, from Egypt to Asia Minor. His stature in these regions derives from the fact that his figure has become somewhat of a composite character, mixing elements from biblical, Quranic, and folkloric sources, at times being the partially contrapositive of Al-Qidr. He is said to have killed a dragon near the sea in Beirut, for which a St. George Bay was built under his name. At the beginning of the 20th century, Arab Christian women visited his shrine in the area to pray for him. Feast days. In the general Roman calendar, the Feast of St. George is on the 23rd of April. In the Tridentine calendar of 1568, it was given the rank of semi-double. In Pope Pius XII's 1955 calendar this rank was reduced to simple, and in Pope John XXIII's 1960 calendar to a commemoration. Since Pope Paul VI's 1969 revision, it appears as an optional memorial. In some countries, such as England, the rank is higher. In England, it is a solemnity or feast. If it falls between Palm Sunday and the second Sunday of Easter inclusive, it is transferred to the Monday after the second Sunday of Easter. St. George is very much honored by the Eastern Orthodox Church, wherein he is referred to as a great martyr, and in Oriental Orthodoxy overall. His major feast day is on the 23rd of April. If, however, the feast occurs before Easter, it is celebrated on Easter Monday instead. The Russian Orthodox Church also celebrates two additional feasts in honor of St. George. One is on the 3rd of November, commemorating the consecration of a cathedral dedicated to him in Lydda during the reign of Constantine the Great. When the church was consecrated, the relics of the St. George were transferred there. The other feast is on the 26th of November for a church dedicated to him in Kiev, circa 1054. In Bulgaria, St. George's Day is celebrated on the 6th of May, when it is customary to slaughter and roast a lamb. St. George's Day is also a public holiday. In Egypt, the Coptic Orthodox Church of Alexandria refers to St. George as the Prince of Martyrs, and celebrates his martyrdom on the 23rd of Purim, hat of the Coptic calendar equivalent to the 1st of May. The Copts also celebrate the consecration of the first church dedicated to him on 7th of the month of Hator of the Coptic calendar, usually equivalent to the 17th of November. Patronages. A highly celebrated saint in both the Western and Eastern Christian churches. A large number of patronages of St. George exist throughout the world. England. St. George is the patron saint of England. His cross forms the national flag of England, and features within the Union flag of the United Kingdom, and other national flags containing the Union flag, such as those of Australia and New Zealand. Traces of the cult of St. George in England antedate the Norman conquest in the 11th century. By the 14th century, the saint had been declared both the patron saint and the protector of the royal family. Georgia. The country of Georgia, where devotions to the saint date back to the 4th century, is not technically named after the saint, but is a well-attested backward derivation of the English name. However, a large number of towns and cities around the world are. St. George is one of the patron saints of Georgia. The name Georgia is an anglicization of Gurj, derived from the Persian word for the frightening and heroic people in that territory. However, chronicles describing the land as Georgie or Georgia in French and English date from the early Middle Ages because of their special reverence for St. George. but these accounts have been seen as folk etymology. Compare Land of Prester John. Exactly 365 Orthodox churches in Georgia are named after St. George according to the number of days in a year. According to myth, St. George was cut into 365 pieces after he fell in battle, and every single piece was spread throughout the entire country. According to another myth, St. George appeared in person during the Battle of Didgori to support the Georgian victory over the Seljuk army and the Georgian uprising against Persian rule. St. George is considered by many Georgians to have special meaning as a symbol of national liberation. Malta and Gozo. St. George is also one of the patron saints of the Mediterranean islands of Malta and Gozo. In a battle between the Maltese and the Moors, St. George was alleged to have been seen with St. Paul and St. Agatha, protecting the Maltese. Besides being the patron of Victoria Ware Street, George's Basilica, Malta is dedicated to him. St. George is the protector of the island Gozo. Portugal. Devotions to St. George in Portugal date back to the 12th century. Saint Constable attributed the victory of the Portuguese in the Battle of Alubarita in 1385 to St. George. During the reign of King John I, St. George became the patron saint of Portugal, and the king ordered that the saint's image on the horse be carried in the Corpus Christi procession. The flag of St. George was also carried by the Portuguese troops and hoisted in the fortresses. During the 15th century, Portugal and St. George became the battle cry of the Portuguese troops, being still today the battle cry of the Portuguese army, with simply St. George being the battle cry of the Portuguese Navy. Romania. St. George is the patron saint of Romania, and a number of churches and towns are dedicated to him, including Sfântu Gheorghe in Covasnu County,